But in that sense, doing information right is like an insurance policy. Everything is fine. You don't need it until you need it. And then you need it. You mentioned search before. I'm a big believer in that kind of mentality to air quotes unify systems through metadata. I'm absolutely enamored of the intelligent use of metadata to get systems to interoperate, because if you can do it right and you have systems that share even only one field among them, you can do some sort of a universal search and apply the right permissions and all that stuff, so that it behaves as if you've got one big box of data, even though you don't. And to me, that's one of the quickest routes to achieving some kind of real value across the board. Otherwise, it's like you said before, you got to go to this system for that and this system for the other thing. And oh, sorry. Can I ramble for another minute?
No, I like it. Keep going. And I will say, in the sense that, like, we didn't preordain this. We're just having a nice organic conversation. But you did describe a lot of what we achieve, what we try to achieve with our Shinydocs solution, is that search is meaningless without that metadata in that context. You can't just do keyword search and expect to have a good experience. That's not how you buy that refrigerator at Best Buy. You go in there and you do the facets, you look at the attributes, you look at the metadata, and it gives you, here's the 3 fridges that you have to choose from, rather than just looking for the word refrigerator and then here's 3,000 of them for you to choose from. It's a big difference when you do it right.
No, it's critical, and you have to do it almost with bifocals, because you need a near-term one and you need a long-term one. So steps 2 and 3, I think, of our 5-step instant recipe, it's not instant. It boils down to, you have to take stock of your current state. Where are you now? And you have to draw the picture of your future state. What do you want it to look like? And then it's a matter of saying, okay, now how do we get from here to there? And well, I'm not ignoring the technology to that point, because that's part of the current state. What do we have and what do we think we're going to need as we get to future state? That's when you can start drilling into that. Say, okay, if we want this functionality, because it's going to save us that much time and boost the efficiencies and blah, 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 we're going to need a tool that does X. But then you've kind of defined the tool, and you can start the vendor parade, or you can investigate systems you have on site already or in the cloud, under the roof, let's say, and see if they can perform these functions, because maybe they already can. So you have to do this looking near and far at the same time. And that just adds another layer of, well, let's hate the consultant, because some of the questions can be really tough. And some of the answers can be really telling. And there have been times where I've talked to people kind of on the front lines, and I said, listen, unless you want me to, I'm going to keep your name out of it, because I'm collecting information from a lot of different places, people struggling the way you're struggling, and I'm going to present them sort of the aggregate picture. But if you want a meeting, I can probably set it up. And so far, I think 0 people have taken me up on that.
Oh, wow.
Well, it's a very small number anyway, because a lot of times it's the politics that get in the way, the turf wars.
Let's assume that I'm a CEO of some organization that we're an insurance company, or maybe we're a utility or something like that. We make money, we're established, and I like this. I'm 5 years away from retirement. And all these things is like, oh, now all of a sudden people are saying that we need to comply with privacy laws, and people are being hacked. And we got new employees coming on complaining that they can't find anything, and nobody's trained them on where it is in the file share and whatever. All I want is to just have the business that I've had for the last 25 years and the same profit and these types of things. And it is kind of a reasonable request, but at the same time, the world is changing. and there's
Mhm.
always increased competition. The idea of just staying the same and then maintaining your income and all that kind of stuff shouldn't exist. So there's this element of privilege of ownership. As you go into retirement, how do we help those companies that are resistant to actually solving a problem that they know they have, but they just don't want to do it right now? And unfortunately, you got half of the staff, like the innovation staff, and you got the staff that are feeling the pain of the audits that they're failing or these other things. And they're saying to the rest of the business and the board, you got to fund this to stay competitive. You got to fund this in order to attract better staff. You got to fund this to give the best customer experience and competitive. Please do it. And they're saying, well, see how long you can hold off. What are good techniques to try to rope in the board and the ownership and the CEOs perhaps that might be on their way out? How do we get them on side in the meantime?
This is a joke, of course, but hack them.
Okay. There it is. Yeah, so
Unjoke.
You're putting on your black hat there for a second. Yes.
Well, the thing is, and a lot of times they don't even know that the response is, well, it's always worked. You know, the employees are happy, even if they're not, even if they're frustrated, because the people in the corner offices can be somewhat isolated. And a lot of the pushback I get from the front end, by the way, is, what do they know about how I do my job? And I tell them, this is your opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm your agent in court, you know, or the jester or something.
You got the audience, no matter how you got it, you got it.
Yeah. Yeah. Nothing will capture an organization's attention faster, though, than something bad happening. So that's why I was making the joke, hack them. If they get hacked and they go, oh man, that was bad, or there's a breach of some other variety, information gets out that shouldn't have, you know, or they get sued, or they're in violation of some major compliance something. I remember, it's years ago, but not that many, going to different trade shows, and here's the same basic technologies on opposite sides of the corridor in the exhibit area. And this company's chasing law enforcement, here, use this to put people in jail. And this company's targeting regulated companies, saying, here, use this to stay out of jail.
Mm-hmm. It's
didn't say that on a sign, but that was.
It's a total arms race, exactly.
Yeah. So in that sense, and it's a very hard sell, admittedly, but in that sense, doing information right is like an insurance policy. Everything is fine. You don't need it until you need it, and then you need it.
Yeah. The good news,
you know what I mean?
The industry is helping us along, though, with like colonial pipelines and other weird things that are happening. It's obviously, we don't need to hack it. There's other people who are helping us out.
Yeah, I know.
Shining that light on it right now.
But another expression that we use back in the days when I was helping to start a group called the Information Coalition. It's since been merged into ARMA a couple of years now. But we used to talk about, and I still do, everything is information. And there's a slide that I have that if I thought about it, I'd show now, but I'd have to find it. But it's the construction yard. I had an industrial contractor client, and I went out into the yard and I took a picture with all the vehicles and the pipes and, you know, spools of cable. They built things like oil platforms and, you know, heavy duty. And I realized each one of those is a host, represents a host of information, because the pipe has a part number, and it probably has a part number from the place they sourced it, or they built it and made it in their own machine shop. So there was a work order, and there's a materials list, and there's the invoices because they had to buy those materials. And what about the weld, and who the inspector was, and there was his credentials or her credentials up to date. And you realize the fact that there's a flatbed trailer with huge spools of cable on it, that's almost irrelevant. The physical asset is almost irrelevant to what we're talking about, which is all the information that's embedded and associated with those physical assets. It becomes a really big deal. And then you say to somebody, well, what happens if your systems get hacked? What happens if there's a hurricane? Maybe it's not somebody doing something evil, but it's just, we're getting weird tornadoes, even here in Massachusetts, we never used to have. Stuff happens. What are you going to do if it knocks out your server? Are you backing the stuff up somewhere off site? And another client of mine that was based near Miami said, oh no, we have that covered. I said, well, where is the backup? In Tampa. It's like, they get hurricanes too.
So Steve, we had talked about the kind of different strata, different layers. So there's some organizations out there who have nothing, and that's okay. There's some who have nothing. There's some who have something, and then there's some who have programs that they've actually tried to do for information and have failed. From your experience going into a lot of different organizations, how many are in these different layers, and do they know where they stand? Do they know that they're immature? Do they know that they're somewhat mature, or do they know that they are very mature but they know they need work to do? How do they tell if they don't know?
How do you know that you don't know something?
Yeah.
And how do you know what it is you don't know? Truth of the matter is, I don't feel like I'm in a position where I can really answer the question of how many kind of fall in each, because the fact that I'm on scene means there's a certain awareness already by whoever it is I'm talking to. A lot of times it's because something bad did happen or almost happened. Another client, my client discovered that one of the senior executives was frustrated accessing their email when they were away from the office. So they took their entire PST file where the Outlook emails are, and they put it into Box. And of course, the security people,
Yeah.
when my client found that out, she was like, what now? So there are workarounds and things where they don't really know until you start investigating. But part of my client's charter was, please go investigate. They found a piece of equipment on eBay. It was a utility, and it shouldn't have been there. They have a process for selling equipment that they take offline, and that wasn't followed. So in a lot of cases, I think it's a matter of staying in front of people and pointing out symptoms. So I'm grateful to be here today, for instance, because I'm hoping people will see this and maybe it starts some of the wheels spinning. Think of it this way. Let's say you're a tennis player, which I am not. But yeah, you have tennis elbow. My elbow always hurts. It's not debilitating. I can still function fine. It's just, it just aches all the time. And you don't think about it. And you don't go to the doctor because my arm hurts. But if you're there for your physical and the doctor says, I notice you're a little ginger, something going on with your arm. And then you say, oh yeah, well, I have this. So I think part of it is that where organizations are so used to living with a certain amount of informational pain that it's background noise. Mm-hmm. And until something bad happens, like your arm falls off,
yeah,
or you just wake up one day and you can't even reach for your wallet, they just live with it. But if something happens or almost does, like finding the email in the cloud, because then at least nothing bad had happened, so they could snatch it back. It gets people to thinking, well, what if that had happened? What do we do? How do we keep that from happening? And then you're on the path.
I love that metaphor. I've never really thought about that before. We do live with information pain all the time. How often do people go, oh, I hate that whatever SharePoint search, or I hate the fact that you're forcing me to go over to this other web system instead of me just sharing it on my file share. I hate the fact that you're making me do this. And then people end up working around it. It's that classic where you show here's the sidewalk that's paved, and then you got the path that's cutting the corner, and this is the user experience. Right. This is how they're actually doing it, but the path was the design, and people will always find a way around it. And I feel like that's kind of part and parcel with this, is that either people are just going to live with the pain and then still do the task, or they're going to just find their own way of doing it. And next thing you know, all of your email is in some cloud system that was unauthorized, and you might be in trouble. That makes sense.
You bring up a really important point, though. The people side of this, when I first started consulting, and that's good long time ago. I was 6 feet tall in those days. Um, I knew the people part was important, but I tended to like focus on the IG planning and all that stuff, the program, and then deal with the people part. And over the years, they became equal in importance as I began really to appreciate how much of the success of a program is people based. You go into enough meetings, and this is true, where all the IT people are on this side of the table and the line of business people are on this side of the table, and they're all sitting like this. And I show up, I said to one group, said, I'm coming tomorrow with a striped shirt and a whistle because you guys clearly need a referee.
Mhm.
There are lots of techniques to utilize even as you're doing quote unquote the IG work. I mean, it's all IG work.
Sure.
But the behavioral change, the cultural change, you've got to deal with it. And a lot of it is essentially marketing. The line I often use with the people at the front line is they're asked me to be here because they know something's up. And I'm working really hard to make sure you understand that this isn't being done to you, this is being done for you, whether or not you believe it. Whatever your prior experiences have been, Jerry Maguire, help me help you.
Mhm.
And make them feel part of the process from the get-go. Sometimes they just don't believe it, and you have to find a department or a group or an application, the proverbial low-hanging fruit, where you can fix something significantly in a short period of time that you can then show people. This is what we're talking about. I'm glad you mentioned it because it's vital. Nothing will kill a program faster than people refusing to play along.
Well, I like that, Steve. And nowhere in there was we're going to force them to do it because it's the right thing, or they're going to buy in because we're going to tell their department head that they have to buy in. We've evolved beyond that. And I feel like the idea of doing it for somebody and with them is the only way to prove it, because this is not a commodity yet. And I think if I go back to that unfair group that we identified at the start, who's not doing it, and you suggest that it's unfair because by the time you get in there, they're already thinking about it. The only time that group is going to start getting it is when it's commoditized, when it's obvious what you need to do and obvious the benefit to everybody. Then boom, next thing you know, you'll install the Steve Weissman server and you got information governance across your system and the AI takes over, and that sounds awesome. And I can't wait until we have that. But in the meantime, yeah, we do need to provide a lot of value for the people and give them something that not only are they willing to use, but they identify the benefits. And I think that's kind of what you're leading to there.
I am. At the same time, I'm not sure that this can actually be commoditized, at least not to that degree. I know and appreciate and agree with the point that you're making, that it shouldn't be such a heavy lift forever. But in point of fact, each organization is different enough from others that I don't know that IG in a box is really a thing. There are certain steps to, the 5 steps things you asked me about at the beginning was just my way to try to encapsulate some of the basics that I've learned over the years. That there are these commonalities, but the details really differ. How big is your place? How many departments do you have? How many locations do you have? What volume of information do you have, and what media do they span? Because I'm not talking about paper records, I'm talking about electronic records. I'm talking about USB sticks with images and music, so really there's a typical consultant answer, I know, but it really does depend. So I think you can commoditize the thinking to a point, but in terms of actually doing the work, even when you buy an insurance policy, they give you a template, but there's lots of options. How much, like auto insurance, there's nothing magic about it, but how much personal liability coverage do you want? Do you want us to cover the rental car in case your car is in the shop? There are still things to think about.
Yeah, it's in your own performance, and your child, are they going to be driving it? And do you have a history of accidents and other things? Like these are all factors that make one size not fit all.
I always joke about it. One size fits all, just some better than others.
Exactly. Yeah. 60% of the time it works 100% of the time.
Yeah.
Well, that was awesome, Steve. I appreciate you taking the time today. How do people find you?
I'm one of the most reachable people in the world. So my email is steve@hollygroup.com. I'm on Twitter, cleverly at Steve Weissman. I'm on LinkedIn under Steve Weissman. You'd think that was my name or something. People like to do it the old fashioned way by phone, 617-383-4655. It's funny, hardly anybody calls anymore, which is fine.
You're going to get a ton of texts though over the next little while. So
Well,
that's good.
I hope so. I'm also not a guy who runs the meter every time somebody pings me.
Mm.
If people have questions or thoughts, shoot me an email or find me on LinkedIn, or I learn from that too. And if it turns out to be something that requires time, so well, then we talk about it. But I love these conversations, and I thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed it quite a bit, and I hope you didn't mind, or the viewers don't mind my droning on and on and on. I just get excited.
It's my pleasure, Steve, and I found it helpful. So thanks a lot, and be well. I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Likewise. Thanks very much.